The Vedic Astrology podcast is brought to you by a dedicated and intimate community of patrons. Perhaps you'd like to join us where we meet every week to check in and talk astrology, and where we have monthly gatherings to deep dive into our personal charts, to study Vedic astrology, and to apply and harness transits. Join us today, and thanks for listening to the Vedic Astrology podcast. Hello, everyone. My name is Fiona Marks, and I'm delighted to be here with my good friend, Sachin. Today, returning to the podcast, it's lovely to have you back. Sachin, thanks for coming along.
Thank you so much for having me.
You have written a new book, and it is a rich examination of Jyotish. It's called The Ologies of Jyotish, and it's available from your website, searchandsachin.com. And it's a multidimensional inquiry into being, becoming, and unbecoming. And it looks at the metaphysics of karma from a transdisciplinary perspective. So you've been busy since we last saw you, because the last time you were here, we actually talked about the Jyotish project and the invitation to fully engage with Jyotish. So in the meantime, you've produced this great book.
Thank you so much. This book has been bubbling within me for so long, because for me, the fundamental question, what is Jyotish, is something that I've struggled and wrestled with a lot. And we even had a discussion about this, and we did an entire episode on what is Jyotish, which is a super important episode. As I kept asking that question repeatedly, what is Jyotish? What do we mean when we say sun is the Atman, moon is the Manas? What is the fundamental philosophy of Jyotish? We are applying Jyotish in different ways, but we've never thought about what are we even applying. So we know, for example, every discipline has its own philosophy, its own ways of thinking, what's the developmental process of that discipline. But with Jyotish, it is not that clear. It's still in a daze. And my effort has been to engage Jyotish as a rigorous philosophical discipline, which disciplines the mind, which disciplines the heart, disciplines the intellect. And it requires thought in ways that we are not used to when we speak about such matters, because it's become more about meaning curation rather than precise objective analysis. And meaning curation has narrative building, has a lot of value, a lot of psychotherapeutic value. But when it comes to knowing something, which becomes the guiding principle, so that the narrative, the meaning that we are curating is not out of some haphazardly imagined circumstance, situation, but is actually grounded in some metaphysics. It's grounded in some rules, if I may, natural laws, if I may, that do not change with culture. For instance, if light moves at a certain speed where I'm sitting, the same laws are being applied to where you are sitting, where those who are listening right now are sitting. Similarly, metaphysics is the same. Things don't shift according to cultural context. And a lot of astrology and astrologies of the world have become dependent on the culture, the narratives and the myth are being curated out of that. But under that, there are themes that are common. So archetypes can be different. They can have different faces. They can be holding different weapons. They can have different tails, but the archetypal theme, these things would be the same. So we need to have that level of conversation of Jyotish as a metaphysical system. A system that is telling us about the nature, the structure, the scope of how consciousness experiences life on Earth. Jyotish is earthbound, it's earth-specific. The metaphysics, it belongs to this particular space-time. We are studying time, and time is relative. And the time we are studying in Jyotish is specific as far as I can tell from my limited understanding and logic, is that it belongs to earthly metaphysics. Maybe there are other solar systems with their own metaphysics where there are 2 Jupiters, 5 Jupiters, and people are having a brilliant time, or there are 15 Saturns in some solar system and they're freaking out, or having deep realization about the nature of suffering, which is the nature of reality as per Gautama Buddha, Sarvam Dukkham. So the book is an effort to start this dialogue of philosophical inquiry into how to think about Jyotish as metaphysics, as metaphysical systems, the branches of metaphysics, you can say ontology, epistemology, but different branches of philosophy, ethics. So my fundamental things that got stuck with me, that brewed this text within my heart, one of them was, what is Jyotish? The question, what is Jyotish? The idea that the ancients considered Jyotish to be the eye, and Jyoti being light, and eye being what makes light relevant to us is our eyes, fundamentally. And other than that, it starts becoming more sound, which is Shabda. But Jyoti is fundamentally light connected with eyes, and Jyotish is being given the eyes. So how can Jyotish start perceiving different philosophical systems and start to have the right kind of sight for these disciplines? So there are about 16 ologies. Ology is a subject of study, a branch of knowledge. So we are considering metaphysics as the basic. That's not one of the ologies. That's the fundamental ground from which the book arises. The book says that Jyotish is fundamentally a metaphysical system. We are trying to understand what I call the psychometaphysics, the psychological subjective relevance of metaphysics. The idea is that Jyotish, being a metaphysical system, must be applied in different contexts for the subjective person. And from that, the idea comes, it's a psychometaphysics because it's relevant to the personal. It becomes personal. That's the fundamental idea. So what does Jyotish have to say about linguistics? What does Jyotish have to say about ontology, phenomenology, psychology, sociology, epistemology, soteriology, axiology, ethics, praxeology, physiology? Jyotish is the metaphysics from which everything else comes. Sociology was one of the very interesting ones that stood out while I was writing, because that was also another topic which was very close to my heart, because we have in Jyotish the natural relationships of the grahas. And that is so profound because we fundamentally know that, for example, Mars and Mercury have a certain relationship. Mercury, that is Buddha, is obstructing influence towards Mars. Mars is neutral towards Mercury. So if we apply this on a practical level, on a societal level, because we are now getting into sociology, we see Mars being police. And if a police wants to catch a criminal, they can see the crime happening, but they need to follow the rules, which is Mercury. They need to fill out the paperwork, which is Mercury. It slows down the process. And if you speak to cops, they'll tell you how frustrating this can be. But bad cops also manipulate the law, Mercury, and through that obstructs martial processes, obstructs justice delivery systems, which is martial systems. So we now see that it is a metaphysical proposition. That's fundamentally the nature of things on earth. You'll find every society have a variation of this going on some level, of Mercury doing something to Mars. Some societies have really mastered this and allow the least amount of leakage, and it happens in the shadows. Some countries, it's outright, blatantly happening, and everyone knows about it. So Mercury, Mars is just one example. There are several examples. Venus and Jupiter's relationship. And these things represent different things within our individual consciousness, which is the psychology of it, the personal side of it, and sociology. And sociology then can be further extended into governments. You can assess governments, relationships between governments, political philosophy, which was essentially fundamentally sociology in the early 20th century. That's one application of Jyotish. If we use the eyes of Jyotish in all of these different ways, what can we figure out? So this book is just a gesture. This is a beginning. So each chapter in the book is a brief sort of focus and a Jyotish understanding of it to begin the dialogue, for you to disagree, for you to start disagreeing with me, so that I can start to interrogate, investigate more, come back with a better answer for you. So then you can disagree some more, so that I can go back and find an even better answer for you, for myself also. So this book is sort of thrown out in the collective stream of consciousness to go through a churning process. I want this to become a thing. There's this one bit in the book, for example, linguistics, philology. What is the role of language in Jyotish? So this was very important. This got triggered through this encyclopedia I studied, The Philosophy of the Grammarians. It's the volume 4 of Encyclopedia of Indian Philosophies. They speak of all the grammarians and the people who used linguistics, language, as a tool for realization of deeper states, deeper realizations about themselves, about life, about nature of reality and things like that. For me, etymology, language, shabda, which is the term for fundamental sound that we make when we speak, and Sanskrit being carefully constructed. That's what Sanskrit literally means. Consciously constructed. The importance of using Sanskrit as the vehicle that's going to carry the message of Jyotish. Jyotish is a very sophisticated, subtle, metaphysical, very sensitive system. When you're dealing with someone who's traumatized, the language that will carry the vehicle of their psyche has to be a very sensitized language to carry them gently. Even when you have physical trauma, you make sure that the bed that you're going to put the person on is well cushioned. You don't put them on a hard board. Similarly, when you use a mental, emotional, or traumatized psyche, you use words that have been carefully constructed, consciously constructed for them to be carried gently. Similarly, if you extend that logic further, Jyotish is a very, very subtle system, and the subtler the system, the more manipulation there is. So Sanskrit is a consciously constructed, carefully curated language that becomes the vehicle that can carry a sensitive system like Jyotish. A subtle system like that requires a subtle language like Sanskrit. So that's the emphasis in that chapter. The 4 levels of speech. Para, for example, the unmanifest, undivided sound. Pashyanti, Madhyama, Vaikhari. All of these mean something. Different systems have their own ways. The ideas around Vedangas. So Vedangas, which says that Jyotish is the eyes, Veda Anga, the Angas, limbs of knowledge, has other Angas, Shiksha, Chandas, Vyakaran, Nirukta. All 4 of them have something to do with sound, language. Shiksha is phonetics, Chandas is meter, rhythm, Vyakaran is grammar, Nirukta is etymology. So out of 6 limbs, 4 are dealing with linguistics. That's how important it is. That's what they say, the words you speak is the house you live in. We really understood this, that it represents the consciousness. After writing this book, because it was such an experience and I'd said all the things that were like burning inside of me, I became really dull for the next 3 months. I was like, I don't want to think about deep stuff anymore for some time. I just want mundane, normal things. I just want to have dumb conversations. I want to watch silly YouTube channels, watch some silly Netflix show and just balance it out, because it just took me into such a place the writing process to balance it out.
There's a real rigor to this work, Sachin. This is not a light exploration stimulated by other ologies. Oh, let me just write some words about how Jyotish and that ology might link together. It's not that book. This is a rigorous examination and inquiry into profoundly what the eyes of Jyotish bring to that department or that discipline of metaphysics. So I can understand that it was a fatigue.
Yeah, it was a fatigue.
I mean, it's interesting that language is one of the first chapters in the book, and throughout the book, one of the rigors is the language. Whatever chapter you're in, the clarity with the terminology is one of the things that you take the time to make sure, as much as possible, you're clear about what it is you're examining and what you're inviting people to engage with.
Yeah.
And for example, the book has a fantastic glossary at the end of the book. If at any point you begin and you get overwhelmed, there is this wonderful glossary at the back of the book for these terms. And that in itself is useful because Jyotish astrology, Vedic astrology can lend itself to people's intuition, and people can use it almost intuitively, perhaps without much exposure to the philosophy behind it or to where it fits into metaphysics or anything like that. Sometimes people have an intuitive connection with the symbols, and without realizing it, we can be a bit loose with our language when we approach it in that way. We don't realize when we're mixing things together. Where Sachin and I met was at the Asheville Vedic Astrology Apprenticeship Program.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the great strengths of that program is that it has a discipline also to try to teach Vedic astrology in foundational layers.
Yeah.
Which obviously Vedic astrology or Jyotish is an entire unified, enormous field. And to have the discipline to just lay one foundation and make sure people understand that, and then the next one, and then the next one, already brings a kind of rigor to one's practice. But here we see in this work as well the rigor of trying to use language to be clear. And we have this glossary at the end, which is a great gift that you're giving as well as all this clarity. There's so many things that I want to ask you, Sachin, about the book. As I'm listening to you with those of us simpletons who are not as linguistically clear as you, I want to understand a little bit. For native English speakers, we're very, in our ear, we hear what ology means, or we think of biology, or we can hear this sound at the end of the word. And you are mentioning it's a Greek word that means the study of something. Maybe for native English speakers, one of the places that we're most familiar hearing that is in medicine. We have oncology and neurology and cardiology, something that we understand that medicine has these different specializations. So as we look at the framework of this book through all of these ologies, if we were thinking of the metaphor of a hospital, are we thinking that Jyotish would then be like the medicine, like the hospital? It's using Jyotish as the place where we go in, and using this vision of Jyotish, we look at all of these different disciplines?
Yeah.
Or is it that whenever we're in a hospital, as the human, we are 100% amazing, enormous field of consciousness with all of our memories and all of our patterns of thought that walk into that hospital, and if we see an oncologist, we get one diagnosis about who we are, and if we see a cardiologist, we get another view. They're all dissected views of this one amazing, vibrating representation of a human being. So in this book, do we think Jyotish more as being the hospital, the medicine, like looking at all of these departments and specializations, or is Jyotish also the human walking into this hospital that can never be divided into little departments?
It's both. It can be both. Yeah. It's both. It can be divided. It cannot be divided. We need to dissect and understand it from one angle. So when we're looking at sociology department of a metaphysical hospital of Jyotish, then in the sociology department, while you're discussing a dynamic between two grahas, it's a psychological dynamic. Essentially, inherently, everything is mental, right? That's what they say. Everything is mind, what we like to use. So it's psycho-ontology, it's psychometaphysics, it's psychophysiology, it's psychosociology. That's another argument that I make in general in life, is that everything is fundamentally driven by the psychological motivations of people and groups, and collectives and stuff. So Jyotish becomes that fundamental ground, which is the metaphysical ground, on which all other departments can survive. So if a psychologist, they have a trauma-centered approach, they're right. If they have a neurobiological approach, they're still right. If they have a hormonal approach to it, they're right. If they have some holistic chakra, sort of some modern new age sort of approach, they're still right. That's what Jyotish does to you. It makes you see how all of them are right. They're just looking at the same sphere from a different side. It's the same thing. If a trauma would also alter the person's neurobiology, so the way to enter the body and heal, it would be through the nerves. And if you have a trauma-centered child development approach, you're right. You're basically right. And whichever department you start your healing journey from, I mean, obviously, if you have a physiological thing happening, you wouldn't want a psychological department. You go to Ayurveda. So you start with, okay, what am I eating these days? Then the question becomes, why am I not stopping myself from eating this? Then the psychology bit would start, and then the sociology bit would start, that the environment is pushing me to eat this. Like, there is no good food available. Many places have zero water. They don't sell water, and the soda is cheaper than water in those places. So then you go to the sociology department. So you start your journey, okay, I'm having a physical ailment, and then you start eating a medicine for that. And then you're like, okay, now this physical ailment keeps repeating itself. Then you go to the psychology department of that. But the hospital itself is the Jyotish hospital. And that's the training now they're giving to doctors. They are giving diet and nutrition training to doctors. For the longest time, a lot of the general physicians, a lot of the people had no idea about nutrition. They were basically trained to diagnose, identification, and medicine prescription training. There was no training on gut health, all the connections between the gut and the brain and all of these things. Now they're teaching these kinds of things. Similarly, in Jyotish, we have been given the training to predict. This is what will happen in the future. This is what's going to happen. Why is it going to happen? Why is there a predictability of a future in the first place? Why is your future predictable in the first place? That shows that there are patterns that you have. How about we identify the patterns that make your future predictable? So then you wouldn't need a Jyotishi to predict your future. You would be able to predict your future. If you know you have a sugar craving, you just know you're going to have a diabetes thing. So you don't need a thing happening in your chart with certain graha in a certain house and different things in your D30 and stuff, and the Jyotishi be like, oh, this guy will become diabetic after 20 or 30 years. That's the last thing a person wants from a Jyotishi. What we want is that, why are you eating so much sugar? What's happening to your moon? How are you feeling? Let's work on that. And the moment they identify that, yes, this is something, this food connection that is happening to me is because of something related to my psyche, it will naturally occur to them that the future is going to look like this. So if I identify that I have a pattern to read a lot of books, I don't need a Jyotishi to predict that after 10 years I'm going to start writing a book, maybe, given all the other possibilities, right? So we need to identify our current structures, and based on that, predictability becomes easy. And past. You have to assess the past, release yourself from the past, and become completely observant in the present, and then you can move to futures, not even that big a deal. In fact, it's exactly not what we're not supposed to use Jyotish for. Probably what survived of Jyotish is from the darker parts of time.
In the same way that medicine in some ways had until recently become that come in with a symptom and I'll give you a pharmaceutical for it, but that pharmaceutical is going to unbalance something else, and then you'll come in later and you'll need another pharmaceutical, for example. Yeah. It had become a little bit like that. Yeah. And Jyotish can be like that too. It's on the pointy end or on the wrong end. Whereas what you're saying, and this book invites us to, as people who are interested in Jyotish, to move from that dispensing the prescription for some pharmaceutical that someone has researched or makes money from us selling or whatever, to come back and see all of the integration, all of the ways that the grahas are playing, and so many other parts of the chart are playing to create a pattern that through several steps would end up at that pointy end of the prescription being written. But there's a lot more powerful influence that we can have when we understand our chart in this more integrated way.
Yeah. And I think that's the prescription that they're giving. If you see all the work that is based on awareness, including psychology, any yogic system of thought from any part of the world, is fundamentally asking us to become aware. Awareness and Jyoti are synonymous. Jyoti, the word Jyoti, which is light, why out of infinite possibilities, infinite names this discipline could have had, for people who consciously curated their language, they chose the word Jyoti to name this, Jyotish. So they are wanting us to become aware. Why? So that we know more. We can break patterns, we can accept patterns. I was listening to teachings by Padmasambhava, which is Guru Rinpoche. And one of his instructions that he gives is that awareness, watching yourself, your own meditations, he says it's a form of enlightenment. He gives it a lot of value. He says just not acting on our patterns and seeing them, or acting and consciously acting on them. So that's the effort. And the book's effort is to fundamentally be able to answer the question, what is Jyotish? Because we don't know what we're talking about. So when we look at it phenomenologically, what is experienced, what is being experienced, what is the phenomena arising within our awareness? That will tell us something more about Jyotish. So it's a very conscious decision to start with linguistics. It was a very conscious decision to finish with esoteriology and firstly establish that Jyotish is metaphysics, then start with linguistics, because we're going to then carry linguistics as the basis for the rest of the book, because I have to communicate a subtle idea. So linguistically, we have to understand how important it is to understand things properly. And then we build upon in stages of importance. Then we go into ontology. What is even there? First, let's identify there are grahas, there's time, there are houses. What are these spaces? What is a graha? Then we move into phenomenology. What is arising within this space? What phenomena are we experiencing? Why is the phenomenon a certain way? Then we move into psychology. Out of all of this phenomenon, what is personal to me? Out of all of this, why do I feel a certain way? And what is the psyche? What is the nature of the psyche? Then sociology. Sociology cannot come before psychology as far as I am concerned. It comes after psychology that, okay, now how is this individual psyches forming patterns that even start becoming self-governing? Have a life of their own. A group has its own individual life of its own that can influence individuals within the group. Then epistemology. How do we know? How do we know what we know? So this was something that also stuck with me for the longest time, because there were 6 pramanas and stuff, which is pratyaksha, anuman and all of these things. So it really, for the longest time, affected me a lot, that pratyaksha is directly experiencing something. Shabda was testimonial truths. Anuman was inference. When I was studying my Ayurveda course in 2017 and 18, there was one section on 6 philosophies of India, and there I first encountered this idea of pramanas, like epistemology of classical Indian thought. So that's the effort. The effort of the book is fundamentally to keep coming back to the question of what is Jyotish from different angles, and keep trying to clarify that, so that when we have a session with an astrologer, our questions would shift. Our inquiry would shift because our relationship to the discipline has changed. So the kinds of things we'll ask would change because we know what Jyotish is capable of. While studying Jyotish, our research and how we're approaching the subject matter would change.
It's like we've been given a map. So you can explore territory through trial and error, and what you bump into helps you know what Jyotish can do. Or a book like this helps us to see the territory. And like you say, as a client then, or as somebody who's seeking to understand what questions to ask or which parts haven't been answered yet.
Yeah. And exactly. And these seeds were planted many, many years ago. When I was doing the Asheville apprenticeship, Ryan called Rashis as fields of experience. That was a huge shift because we weren't seeing these things like that. When Ernst said grahas are Caesars, that was an ontological reflection. That's where my ontology chapter arises from. And when I was writing, they were coming back to me like, oh, yeah, that was the moment. This is what it is. And then theology, the 15th chapter is theology. What is the divine? What is considered divine? So there are levels of analysis depending on the context, depending on which department of the psychometaphysical hospital you're in. You're focusing on a different side of it. And it's important to focus on different sides of it because that's what's useful in that area. Like when you're healing something in your bone, on your feet, you need to put it in a cast so that it stops moving and the bone can heal. But then you need to eat also so that your bone heals faster. And it also not get overexcited. So you have to take care of your mind so that you don't do something that'll end up getting you frustrated because you can't do so many things in life now that your foot is not working. So it's all connected. All of these ologies are connected. And that's why the idea of a spiral inquiry is an important idea. And a lot of Jyotishic inquiry is spiralic. A lot of the times you start with Rashis or Grahas, Bhavas, and then you go into Shadbal and all of these different ideas as you study your Jyotish, and then you go back to the Grahas. And something about Rashis makes more sense now, while you're studying Graha chapters. And while you're studying Rashis, your first Rashi, and you're like, the ruler is Mars, and you're studying something about one side of Mars. And you're like, oh, Mars on Aries side is something that goes on a head-first approach, head-on approach. And with Scorpio, it's more of a psyop, a psychological operation. And then when you look at a soldier or any military department, they have a department which is confrontational, and they have a department which is psychological, going on a psyop. And Scorpio is its psychological operation that the Mars has to do, the psychological warfare. That's the thing. That's what we're talking about. This is the metaphysical system. That's the thing. That life is being ordered and structured under the influence of certain physical laws. Those physical laws have a metaphysical aspect to them, which makes them psycho-metaphysical.
So it's an invitation for astrologers as well to step up to some territory that they might not be covering at the moment.
And everything is a Jyotishi's territory. That's what I like about Jung. I think it's in Stages of Life. I don't know where it is. He starts talking about how I'm sorry, I apologize to the people of all disciplines, but I just can't help it. Everything is the territory of a psychoanalyst because he says everything is fundamentally driven by psyche. So everything is a Jyotishi's territory. And that's what starts happening to a Jyotishi. You start seeing existence as you are living inside your birth chart. That box that we draw is a diagrammatic representation of your life. All the grahas are the people within your psyche and the people around you. Those boxes are the rooms, the places, the spaces. The 10th house is your office. The 4th house is your room or your house. But within your house, the 4th house becomes the room. The 10th house becomes the living room. Within life, 10th house becomes your office, 4th house becomes your home. And you're living inside, you're walking around that little box of time. That box is the box of Kala, of time. How many Jyotishis are speaking about Kal? Kal is a very important idea. The first sutra in Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra is referring to Maitreya Rishi approaches Parashara Rishi, his teacher, and he says, O knower of 3 times, Trikalagnyam, the one who knows Trikal, who has the Nyam, the Jnana of 3 Kals. So the first sutra of the first chapter of whatever survived of this beautiful text is asking us to begin contemplating the idea of Kal. We need to do that. We need to have these discussions about Jyotish in these ways. Jyotish is not for avoidance. Jyotish is for observance. Light is to see. Maybe you'll be able to change things. Maybe you won't. But the light will give you the insight why you couldn't change this. The light will give you the insight how to change this. The light will give you the insight of why this cannot be changed. How to come to terms with that. That becomes a very important part. And then Jyoti being the cultivation of light, it fundamentally requires yoga as its foundation. So Jyotish cannot function without yogic work. Otherwise you destabilize. You can study, you cannot study, you'll take 6 month, 1 year long breaks from your studies. Professionally you'll be a Jyotishi, but nothing in your life would be like a Jyotishi. because there's no sadhana behind it. Because I'm like that. I don't know this because I know someone like this. I know this because I am like this. That's how I know it's a problem. The best lab that I have. And in metaphysics, the lab is consciousness. So when you're studying metaphysics, when you're a Jyotishi, the lab in psychology, ologies, any ology related to the psyche, is your consciousness and your own observations with yourself. And you have to understand that others are not very different than you. They might be going through a different phase. Given a similar weather, they'll be as wet as you are. You seem to be standing under the rain, you're wet. Push the right buttons and everyone gets to the same point. And that's what is very humbling, so that don't become too full of yourself, because it's just a matter of time.
There's something very healing about that. As a Vedic astrologer, as an astrologer, people do want all the details sometimes of everything and all the reasons why that planet is not working well or this situation keeps repeating. And Jyotish can certainly take you there. But another place that Jyotish can take you is to just such a feeling of grace that it's all unfolding.
Yeah, that's the found. It's such a powerful idea. We all need to really stop and think about this. The idea is, if your future is predictable, we have to not be like, oh, tell me the prediction. The mind-blowing thing is not the prediction. The predictability of things is what's mind-blowing. The mind-blowing thing is the moon, not the finger pointing at the moon. The fact is that if I have all these patterns that are so terrifying because of these grahas, that means there is an order. There's an ordering principle in the first place. That there is a timing to things which is weird. I'm just impatient right now, which is giving me anxiety. Maybe it's time for me to be impatient and anxious. So now you're not doubling your spiraling. Now you're single spiraling.
Exactly.
Now you're not sad about being sad. Now you're like, I'm sad. Now you don't have pity that you're so sad. In your room, everyone is outside. I'm inside. I'm sad. It's like, I'm inside. It's a sad moment for me in my life. I'm supposed to be sad about something that is sad, as opposed to these people. And their time is not to be sad. Maybe they are happy right now. Maybe they had to work really hard to find that joy. And maybe tomorrow they're going to be sad after they've partied and they wake up and they'll be sad again. But for me, I'm sad right now. It's important for me to be sad. I'm not sad that I'm sad. So Jyotish at least stops the spiraling. It just gives you the space to have one state at a time. And that's the term. And the term they used in Sanskrit for this was avastha. It's the space, sthan. Avastha is essentially the present situation, that the temporary modulation you're experiencing. What you're seized by at the moment because of certain things. And the seizure is not self-perpetuated. It arises unconsciously. As if, like, it's just happening.
Exactly. And the knowing inside of yourself that it's not wrong. I think there can be this fighting, it's going wrong, something's wrong. And what this study I find is, if you know inside yourself that it's not wrong, that's it, then you're free.
Yeah.
Just be.
Yeah, it's true. And that's the complexity of it. And Jyotish will always have you in double bind, because Jyotish is complexity. Jyotish is speaking about paradoxes in life. So then sometimes you have to feel that something about you is wrong for you to crack, for you to be able to go to the next stage. I need to even forget all of this and then go into a deep, dark space of wrongness and then crack at the bottom of the sea, and then the light starts moving upwards. It's a tough, harsh process to have, but sometimes that's the process. There will be all sorts of moments in life. If Jyotish is working out for you, then just know that you're moving in the right direction at the moment. It might as much not work out for you as much as it is. It's a matter of time. And then from there, gratitude arises. Now, I'm just glad that it is, because I didn't know when it wasn't, why it wasn't. And now I don't know why it is, now that it is. So really, okay, let's just stay here in this space. Okay, good, this is fine. You understand the fragility of life. And that's what the yogic way is. They are tremendously fragile, not fragile in the traumatized sense, but fragile in the sense of very gentle. They tread very gently on grass. They don't stomp. You become gentler, but then they're harsh grahas. They're grahas that are krura. And then what? And then you need to be krura sometimes.
One of the great practices is withdrawing our attention from the weeds. Jyotish can help us identify things, patterns that our mind loves to go to and create drama that manifests things. And sometimes the greatest practice is withdrawing our attention from that habit to give that weed light. Yeah, and so Kruger planets can help us with that kind of, that's where sometimes we tread firmly. We speak to ourselves and be like, come on, would you like to grow up?
Yeah.
Would you like to wake up?
Yeah.
Because if you want to, you need to keep that light here and not let it go where it habitually does.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Yeah, we need the Krura grahas as much as the Saumya grahas for that reason exactly, for those kinds of moments. You're like, enough, okay, now. When that moment when you take that leap of faith, the stepping out of the comfort zone. And that's why there's just two Saumya grahas, Venus and Jupiter. And then again, this comes down to the sociology, metaphysics, and all of the ideas of Jyotish that we're discussing in the book. Saumya grahas are Venus and Jupiter, waxing moon, that is half of the time moon is Saumya, and Mercury when it's with Saumyas or under Saumya influence. And rest, everything is Krura. You have Rahu Ketu Krura, Sun Krura, which is the Atman, which is Krura. And you can see how hard it is to stay steadfast in your principles when you're going through a sadhana for your Atman. How harsh an experience it is initially. Rahu, Ketu, Sun, Mars, Saturn are all Krura. And then you have waning moon, which is Krura. And you have Mercury, which is Krura when it's with Krura grahas. Krura, the word cruel and Krura have similar roots. Saumya is soft, gentle. And so we want life to be gentle where it needs to be gentle. And Krura is generally, you do better on earth with Krura grahas. You do better metaphysically in silence and calm with Saumya grahas. You need to, as the Tao Te Ching says, I really like this, know the masculine and stick to the feminine. So know the Krura, stick to the Saumya. I'm Krura with what I'm talking about in the book, but the way I'm talking about it, the way I am right now, is I'm trying to be as Saumya as I can. But the ideas, they are all trying to wake us up to realities of Jyotish.
And that is the rigor that I was speaking about in the book. When you get a chance to read the book, you will see how Sachin is using the tool to cut through the excess, the delusion, the lack of awareness. So, yeah, it's beautifully clear. One of the things as we come towards wrapping up, Sachin, that also strikes me is the power of using Jyotish to describe this practice rather than Vedic astrology or astrology, because astrology in itself becomes an ology, right? It becomes one of these departments. But this book, if we choose the term Jyotish, is what helps raise it to the Jyotish hospital, or it brings it up to that layer that actually all the ologies are feeding from or are connected with Jyotish rather than astrology being just one of these departments that feeds into metaphysics.
Yeah, such a powerful point. Yeah, it probably needs to be in the book. That's a very good point, because astrology, the distinction that astrology is an ology itself as opposed to Jyotish. I think I need to make that the opener of the book and be like, as Fiona said.
Could we get to the opener as we get to the finishing of our time today?
That's amazing. Yeah.
Sachin, congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much.
I really admire the discipline that you had to examine how each of these metaphysical disciplines is seen through the eyes of the light. And there's a lot for us to learn. I think if you're listening along, you're going to find this book inspiring. You're going to learn a lot. And your language, your ability to be clear is also going to increase. So thank you so much, Sachin, for your work and for coming on to the Vedic Astrology Podcast.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. It's lovely to be with you. And I look forward to being with you again the next time we're together on the Vedic Astrology Podcast. Bye for now. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Astrology podcast is brought to you by a dedicated and intimate community of patrons. Perhaps you'd like to join us where we meet every week to check in and talk astrology, and where we have monthly gatherings to deep dive into our personal charts, to study Vedic astrology, and to apply and harness transits. Join us today, and thanks for listening to the Vedic Astrology podcast.